Hey, what's happening, everybody? Robert Phoenix here over on the live stream for the Friday FARcast. I'm just going to set everything in motion here. And on the other side, I'm going to hit the record and the music, the intro. Maybe I'll just play the intro. So here we go. Welcome to the Friday FARcast with me, Robert Phoenix. And away we go. So on today's show, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what's happening with the EU. The EU is getting, how shall we say, quite aggressive when it comes to internet rights. And I'm going to lay an idea on you about the EU today that will have you thinking about the EU perhaps in an entirely different light. We'll also look at some of the drama surrounding AI. Some of you who follow Joe Rogan are probably aware of the fact that he had Elon Musk on the show, and they got into the AI piece, which I think is significant. So I'm going to break some of that down. We're also going to look at the death, quote unquote, suicide of Jason Harrison. This is a really, really unusual piece here. And Harrison was a former football player, played very briefly for the San Francisco 49ers, and was a friend of Donald Trump Jr. In fact, they've been hunting about a week ago in Canada. So we'll talk more about that. Those are just a few of the topics that I'm going to touch on today on the Friday FARcast. And as you know, we cast the line far and wide. Yeah, I'm kind of wearing a fishing hat today. This is my A's bucket. In honor of my team who are trying to make the playoffs. So welcome to the Friday FARcast.
Perhaps in precisely the same way, carrying the same I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this. Such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable has changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.
Well, all right, what's happening out there? Thank you, Mr. Phil K. Dick, with your prescient intonations from the past regarding our future, a future that is looking than perhaps ever before. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about that. If you want to follow me over on YouTube, I'm at Robert Phoenix. That's my channel. So basically, the Friday FARcast and 15 Minutes of Flame are going over to the Robert Phoenix channel on YouTube. You can go there now if you want to be able to get in on the chat. And of course, if you're here on Spreaker, you can get in the chat as well. I'll be doing basically straight astrology over on the other channel, which means the Sunday night live streams. I know it's a bit confusing, but it's okay. Just trying to separate out a little bit of church and state, you know, just in case somebody somewhere along the way says, hey, your content is a bit too controversial, and we're going to have to shut it down. Because then I'll still have my astrology channel, which is really, in a lot of ways, my bread and butter. I am not in Philadelphia. I decided to cancel my trip there for now for a number of different reasons. Probably the most important of which was an inner prompting to not go. And it was a pretty strong inner prompting. Plus, I have a lot of other things here that I need to and have to deal with, some of which on a very personal nature. But I will be back. I will return probably, I don't know, maybe sometime before December, possibly, or after the first year in February. We'll figure that out. But I always love going back there. And it's ironic because there were, I don't know if you people have been following this, but there have been 2 flights. Well, actually, there were 3. There are 2 instances of flights coming into the US where the planes were quarantined. The first one was a UAE flight that was quarantined earlier in the week in New York. I think it was at Kennedy. It's either Kennedy. I think it might have been LaGuardia. So it was a plane coming in from the Middle East. I believe it was from the UAE. It might have been from the UAE. And they quarantined this plane. And a few days later, they quarantined, well, that was yesterday, in Philadelphia, of all places. They quarantined 2 other planes. And they were from, one was from Germany, and the other, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was from Saudi Arabia. And so what did all 3 planes have in common? Question mark. We got one person that gave a thumbs up. Hey, if you're over here on the YouTube channel, just let me know. Give me a heads up. Get in the chat room and say something if you're over here. I tell you, in a month, this thing will be popping. Now that I have my lucky owl in the background, you see lucky owl? It's my lucky owl. I got all my totems up there, right? I got my wise man, my African wise man. You know, with the hey, what's going on, then? You know, with the Anunnaki head. So I'm covering the Anunnaki thing, my Elohim brother. And then we have my owl. Then we have the crystal, the magical crystal, the glowing crystal. And then to the left of that is the medal, the trophy that my team won back in 2016, fall 2016. True triumph for me and my team. Anyway, let's see what's going on Facebook over there. She's chirping at me. Yeah. Okay, so we got that. All right. So welcome to the show. And if you're just tuning in, I was talking about these flights that were coming in from 3 separate points. I think one was from the UAE, one was from Saudi Arabia, and then the third was from Germany. What did all 3 have in common? Well, all 3 had in common the fact that they were populated by people that had been to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. So that was a pretty common theme on that. And they all got sick. They were all really, really sick. You know, they were all kind of exhibiting flu-like symptoms. This is really interesting in some ways. You know, we live in such a symbolic universe. And I know that there are a lot of people that don't like to think about that, but we do. It's just the way it is. You know, symbols define our lives in a lot of ways. And we can transcend the symbols, but we have to be free. You know, we have to transcend just about everything, right? I'm looking a little brown today. This gives me a little bit more of a street vibe. Yeah, I can get down with maybe like a Cajun accent. I could sell this. I can rock this. I could do a show like this. No, I can't. But I'd like to have it like this. This is an interesting effect. Kind of gives me that Dr. John Al Hurt kind of vibe, right? Al Hurt. Now I'm really, really dating myself. So we're talking about symbols and how symbols define, in a lot of ways, how we live. You hit a stop sign. That is a symbol, right? It is a symbol. Well, it's a sign. It's a sign and a symbol. And you have to stop. You've got to, you know, it's like, okay, it's red. And so we become conditioned to the color red. We become conditioned to the shape of the stop sign. And that's just a minor kind of symbolic representation of our lives. And there are very significant ones. like I was watching the NFL game last night from Philadelphia, and of course, refs are in this country. They're generally wearing black and white. Why black and white? Well, because black and white represents duality. And they are the arbiters of duality in a contest that will provide a winner and a loser. There will be a hero and a goat. There will be the spoils of victory and then the bitter roots of defeat. This is what it represents. And so when we see those referees all striped up in black, we know that we're being conditioned to be in a dualistic experience. That's what happens. In baseball, when we see an umpire, he's all dressed in black. I don't think there's a she yet. In the minor leagues, there are. I could be wrong. But they're all dressed in black. Black is the color of Saturn. And so when we see umpires umpiring a game, we know immediately that they're going to be dressed in black. And even though we don't know that black is the color of Saturn, though I just shared that with you, they are performing a rite of Saturnalia. They are the judges. They are the lord of the contest. They, in many respects, are the game overseer director. They are gods. That's what they are. It's a game. They're overseeing it. And their calls direct, in many ways, which way the game goes. So these are symbols, basic symbols that we live with every single day that we're not even really aware of. So we live in a symbolic life. We live in a symbolic universe. Happens all the time. I was talking about the Nike symbol the other day when I was going down the Colin Kaepernick. By the way, I saw the Colin Kaepernick commercial last night. Nike's going all in. They're going all in on the street cred. They're just going all in. They want eyeballs, man. They want eyeballs. That's it. They just want eyeballs. They want eyeballs. They want traction. They want to get to the top of the hashtag trending on Twitter. That's what they want. Now, whether or not it's a good long-term strategy, who knows? Who cares? I don't think people are into long-term strategies anymore. Even though we're in Saturn and Capricorn, most people are not into long-term strategies. However, the game overseer directors on the planet, they are into long-term strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about that today with the EU. So I saw the Kaepernick commercial. It's about everything you'd expect it to be. It's all the people that represent the demographic of the left or the progressive. I mean, it's all there, right? It's like check, 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 check. I can just see them sitting around Nike. By that way, the guy that's running Nike, he's kind of under fire, and we're living in a very weird time. There are people that are exposing his art collection, which is very bizarre, by the way. It's very, very bizarre. There's a lot of like cartoon mayhem. It's like Hieronymus Bosch meets Looney Tunes. It's bizarre shit. People can have bizarre shit. As long as it's like, I don't know. Tony Podesta has bizarre shit. He's still apparently walking around. Although who knows? Maybe he's in some gulag somewhere. I don't know. We haven't seen those guys for a long time. I'm not condoning like bad. I mean, bad art is bad art. Whatever whatever your taste is, bad art is. It's in the behind the eye of the beholder. But clearly, if there is a violation of a minor that's significant inside the art, I think you're in a different territory. I'm sorry, it's not erotica anymore. It's not erotica. It's even probably beyond porn, because porn is legal. There was a day when porn was so illegal it wasn't funny. I mean, porn. I mean, it was like oh. You had to make some serious sacrifices to get your porn fix on, if that's what you wanted to do. First of all, you'd have to go to a major urban city for the most part, right? Then you'd have to go to a crappy part of town, a crappy part of downtown. It'd be that part of downtown where, you know, people rent rooms by the week. So you'd have to cross that threshold. And then once you cross that threshold, you had to buy a ticket and go inside of a seamy theater and hang out with a bunch of other people that are crossing that threshold. So there were sacrifices that you had to make in order to, you know, get your porn fix on back in the day. Now it's on demand. Everything's on demand. And there was a social stigma for that, pretty significant. And there was a legal one too in many cases. It's not the case anymore. So porn now is not even just porn. I mean, porn is mainstream. You can go into PornTube or wherever you want to go, and there it is. It's mainstreaming. So the new porn is even further out than that. The new porn, the new pornography. And pornography at one point in time, I mean, there were anti-pornography laws in this country. And they've been so watered down and weakened and non-existent now that there is no such thing as anti-pornography laws, which is kind of interesting too, right? I mean, this stuff is allowed to exist. I mean, back in the day, if there was such a thing as the internet, I mean, let's say, for instance, back in the day, you had your TV with VHF and UHF, and somehow somebody got to, like, you know, channel 22 on the UHF bandwidth, and all they did was show porn on that channel. How long do you think that station would have been allowed to exist? Not long at all. And at the same time, there was a wider breadth of freedom of speech on television. And I clearly remember that that news shows would or stations were required by the FCC to provide time for quote unquote citizens. And those citizens would have a minute where they'd get to speak into the camera about any number of situations or you know, agendas or social causes, whatever. It was mandated. And in many instances, you would get editorials by the station manager, and then you would have people that could actually rebut those editorials. That was probably the closest thing to the internet at that time. And if you go back and look at a lot of the content during the 1970s, I mean, it was pretty freewheeling in terms of speech in a lot of ways. Like, I remember watching the Tom Snyder show, Tomorrow Show. And they had an interview on there with this guy by the name of William Shockley. And Shockley is a big brain. He's one of the fathers of modern computing. I think he was one of the guys that started, was it HP or IBM? He was very, very influential. And he held some very, how shall I say this, strict ideas about race. And he's like one of the fathers of Silicon Valley. I mean, that's one of the things that's really interesting too, by the way. Like, Silicon Valley isn't built without Shockley. It's like, that's Silicon Valley's dirty little secret. Was he a white supremacist? I'm not sure if he was a white supremacist, but he was clearly somebody who was not going to be pushed around because of some kind of social agenda or diversity. And he was really bright. He could back things up. He was a nightmare in a lot of ways for people. So one night I was watching him on the Tomorrow Show because I was a kid and I stayed up late, too late, to be honest with you. I stayed up till 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was in the 8th grade and stuff. It just wasn't good. Anyway, people wonder why. Well, how do you know this? How do you know this? I've been watching TV nonstop since I've been about 9 years old. That's why. So he had this debate with his brother, and I couldn't believe this, man. He was talking about, like, native intelligence with this you know, this black guy. And they were going at it on Tom Snyder show. You could not get away with that today. There's no way, no freaking way. Now, some people say, oh, that's good. We shouldn't allow those ideas. They were hashing out ideas. It was an open forum. It was at what, 1 o'clock in the morning. Who's awake to watch it? It's 3 o'clock on the East Coast. Most people are asleep. I used to watch this other guy, Dr. Gene Scott. He was a cable TV guy. He was out there. Gene Scott had been a professor at Stanford. What is it with Stanford? I mean, you got Gene Scott, you got Shockley, Anthony Sutton. Stanford's produced some interesting minds, right? So Gene Scott becomes a televangelist. And he's one of these guys that's like on the internet. He was kind of, he had his own cable, his own UHF station, and he was on all the time. All the time. And he was actually really bright. And he was kind of into conspiracy. Of course, he was a Jesus is Lord guy. And then he got into this really bizarre kind of fight with the FCC. I mean, he was almost like an early version of Donald Trump. I mean, he went on for years. I'll never forget one time he had his wingman, who was this black pastor. He was always on the show. And as time went on, Gene Scott would have more and more enemies. And he said, those little wind-up monkeys, with the symbols and stuff. Gene Scott one time wound up all these monkeys, and his wingman started hitting the monkeys with a 2x4. And each one of those monkeys was one of Gene Scott's enemies. He's like, that one's the FCC. Get him, get him, get him. I'm watching this. I'm like, this is crazy. Absolutely crazy. So what I'm trying to get at here is that there was a time when, and I'm not looking back and saying this is the golden age, but there was a time when there was a certain restriction on a certain type of morality it wasn't that easy to access. Like if you wanted that seamy thing, you had to make some sacrifices. You had to go to places that you wouldn't normally go, hang out with people you wouldn't normally hang out in, sit down in chairs that were questionable in terms of their fabric, right? But at the same time, there was a greater kind of bandwidth in being able to talk about things. Yeah, it's true. Absolutely true. I mean, there was a social rights movement going on then. That was happening. Of course, the social rights movement is manufactured. It is. People hate it when I say that. They hate it. They absolutely hate it. They hate it when social rights are important. Don't get me wrong. Everybody deserves to have a shot at freedom, a shot at equality, economic equality, personal equality, whatever that is. Are some people better equipped at that because of their birth and their upbringing? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. But to legislate it doesn't work. It really, really doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I'll give you a case in point, and then we'll get back to this disparity that I'm talking about. There was a high school in, I believe it was it Kansas? It was Kansas. It's a famous test case. They built this incredible high school in Kansas. They just threw so much money at this high school in terms of its facilities, in terms of its equipment, in terms of the teachers. I mean, it was the top of the pyramid for high schools in America. And then they decided that they were going to create a very diverse student body, and they were going to bring in students from outside of the district who were from more disadvantaged neighborhoods. And the data and the stats from what happened from that point forward did not support the idea that you could throw a bunch of money at something and then hope to get a specific result. Because what they found was that over about a 5 to 6 year period, there was actually no improvement in test scores. It was pretty much more the same. So you can't really legislate or administrate the type of personal aspiration and will that it takes in order to succeed on this planet, thrive on this planet, and transcend your conditions on this planet. It just really can't be done. It has to come from a deeply individual place. Now, do you need support in order to do that? Well, it's quite helpful. Do you have a supportive family? No. If you don't have a supportive family, it's more difficult. It's just the way it is. And the way that our culture has been set up is that the family has been atomized, absolutely atomized. So we don't have a lot of support now, or as much. So now we have these kind of weird, extended, in some cases here, like with you and I and other people, we have a digital family. It's true. We have a digital family. And there are interesting connections, like between me and Emily and Randy and me and Heather. By the way, Heather and I have a new moon astrology broadcast up. It's really good. Really, really good. So we have these interesting nodes of tribal connection. But the old family, that's becoming archaic and a relic at this point. Anyway, so I wanted to stay along this theme. I don't want to wander too far off the reservation on it, because there was a wider breadth of freedom of expression during that time. And there was a much more narrow bandwidth in terms of kind of illicit or pornographic or whatever kind of activity you want to label it. Like if you wanted a girly mag, and not just a girly mag, but a girly mag that has some hardcore action, you're not going down to your local drugstore. Like at that time, I think you could get Playboy, which is pretty controversial. You could do that. But if you wanted a hardcore mag, again, you had to go to another part of town to get that stuff. You had to make a personal sacrifice. And, God forbid you were seen by somebody else. It's like, wow, busted. But the tables have turned now. And the illicit and the seamy or the sordid and the pornographic is everywhere. It's everywhere. Some would say, well, this is part of the inversion effect, that this is the kind of the Luciferic mandate where everything is inverted and turned upside down. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. But I also find it interesting that while there's this proliferation of the profane, there's been an inverse response or an inverse connection to free speech. Like free speech is nowhere near where it was in the 1970s, or even the 80s for that matter. There was a lot going on during those times. In the 90s, it begins to shift a little bit. Begins to shift somewhat. The 90s are a very pivotal period, by the way. The 90s were a dark era, very dark. Like I remember the 90s as being, a lot went down in the 90s. And I've talked about this quite a bit. It's, that's when Pluto and Scorpio really starts to get swinging, right, in the 90s. It comes in at, 84, 85? But by the time we hit 89, 90, New World Order, George Bush, it is swinging. We got hip-hop, not just any kind of hip-hop. We got gangster hip-hop. We've got cocaine, crack cocaine, coming up from Central America, South America, being distributed all throughout the United States by people like Freeway Ricky Ross. He's not the only one, but he's one of the more famous ones. And it becomes a very dark era. People's lives get completely destroyed by not just coke, but by crack. Crack is if you went to the crack houses in the 90s, you would go and buy crack. You could. I didn't. It was not my thing. But you could go, and I know people who did that, but you could go buy crack and you would go in the crack house and you could go there and get high and leave. And it was kind of like the modern version of an opium den. And these places were not places you'd want to hang out in for a very long period of time. But if you went there, you would meet people from a broad spectrum of society. You would meet CEOs in crack houses. You would meet professors in crack houses. You'd meet top flight salespeople in crack houses. You'd meet, street hoods in crack houses. You'd meet housewives in crack. All across, you meet athletes. They were all there. They'd all go there. They'd all go there to get high, do their thing, spend a couple hours or an hour or two, whatever. Because crack didn't last up. You get high for about 20 minutes. You'd want more. Perfect. It's perfect. You get super, super high, and your brain just says, more. And I saw lives ruined. I had a really good friend. He was a teacher. He was a college teacher. And he met a guy, one of his students. This was in Oakland. His student said, yeah, I'll take you to a cool place. And next thing you know, his life's in the shitter. He's lost everything. He's going through rehab. And that was the 90s. The 90s were dark. They were freaking dark. So this period I'm talking about, the 70s and the 80s, that's when the free speech kind of window was open. But it's all inverse now. So we have this kind of sense that, oh, look at the license. Look at the license we have. Oh, look at this. I can just go over here and click on this and, I can get a live camera shot of, 4 people doing it right now. Wow. Isn't that great? But speak out against something that you feel strongly about, like, say, the expropriation of farms in South Africa. All of a sudden, you're looking at being shut down or shadow banned. And this is what I'm talking about. So they've given us this kind of arena where we feel like we're theoretically more free, right? It's kind of like moralism and morality versus truth and freedom of expression. So there's been this trade-off. There's been this exchange that's taken place. And it's not, by the way, it is not by chance. It's something that's been engineered, thought out. It's the bread and circus. It's one of the bread and circus pieces that we get. And is it a viable trade-off? I don't think so at all. Do we have to go back to a time where there is no such thing as porn? Do we need stricter laws based on that? Well, good luck on that. Because again, the new porn isn't just what, the old porn is like, it's like soft core now. The new porn is stuff that, people wind up getting killed for. The new porn is the kiddie stuff. The new porn is spirit code. That's the new porn. And if you think that they are not trying to normalize that, well, you're strongly mistaken. And think about what the outcome of something like that would be. What would happen if, like, say, for instance, go back to 1971. If you described the world today to people in 1971, if you pick somebody up and drop them into, this frog pot, they would, like, first of all, they'd be marveled at shit. They would. They'd be like, what? This is so cool, right? In some ways. And then once they got through the tech threshold and saw what was going on, they would flip their wigs. And be like, you're kidding. This is all available now? Marijuana's legal? I could just go online here and I can just watch 4 people and a dog doing it? It would blow their minds. Well, let's take us now and put us into a potential future 30 years from now, where this whole seamy underbelly of what's going on with kids and spirit cooking and all that stuff becomes the new norm. Or not quite. But think about that. And if that's the case, then how would that reflect upon our ability to speak freely, to speak truth to power, I guarantee you there would be none, because that's how far the extreme would have to go. And the other extreme, which would be the ratcheting down of our rights and the ratcheting down of our ability to speak truth to power, would be nil. It would be non-existent. You see where this is headed? So as we move deeper into this timeline, potential timeline, personal authority, speaking truth to power, the right to speak it, becomes like this. It's getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, tighter, until there's just a little tiny, tiny piece left. Meanwhile, on the other side, what we perceive to be moral, immoral, the pornographic representation of a certain part of the world, certain part of our experience goes like this. And it's opening up. So this is something to pay attention to. And I just thought it was kind of an interesting juxtaposition of where we are. And, I mean, personally, I'll transparency. So like every male, we all go through who did that? Wow, right? But a long time ago, I realized that being engaged and watching that material is so desensitizing. It is so desensitizing that you can't even have like a real intimate relationship with a person. Not that I had had any weird things or problems. I didn't have to go to any kind of center or anything along those lines, but I could feel it. And I've always had a pretty good early warning system when it comes to addiction. It's like, oh, no, I'm not going there. I got some self-preservation. Luckily, somewhere inside of me, I have some self-preservation program, which actually works pretty good for the most part. I have to do a serious override in order to get past it. So at that point, or at a point in the past, I just said, this stuff is damaging. And it had nothing to do with the morality of who those people were, what they were doing. I had no idea. It's like, oh, well, whatever. It's just, people made choices. Hopefully they were consenting adults. Right? I mean, not in my case. I didn't go there. Did not go there. But I realized it was like, no, it's not going to cut it, man. It's not going to cut it. And I have had clients who have shared with me stories about their husbands who become addicted to porn, and they have no interest in sex, intimacy, none. And it's become a huge deterrent to any kind of partnership that people can have. So that's where I'm coming from with it. I'm not coming from it from the place of, again, if you're over the age of consent and this is what you're going to do, is what you're going to do. And I'm not going to lay that big moral trip on those two people. I'm not going to say you're a sinner, you're going to go to hell. You got your own soul to deal with. Far be it from me. But my position on it is that it's a wrecking ball for any kind of intimacy, real intimacy and emotion. And if there was anything that we needed to look at in terms of curbing or legislating, not even legislating, I don't know what you do with this now, because the cat is out of the bag. I think the best thing you can do is be a good parent and just tell your kids, stay away from this. Provide loving models of, two people together and show them what it's like to, just have a really solid family and real trust, real bonds. I think that's the only way right at this point we can kind of counteract some of this stuff. That's just my sense, my 2 cents. I mean, the other thing is you can turn off the internet. That would be another way of doing it. But we're so embedded into this thing now that it's very, very, very difficult. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about the juxtaposition of this one level of what we call expression or freedom of expression versus another level of freedom of expression that is being tamped down, truncated, and in some cases completely locked up and inaccessible. So to that end, they had a big series of meetings on Capitol Hill talking about this very same issue. And one of the highlights or lowlights was Alex Jones confronting Marco Rubio. And, Marco Rubio is just trying to play him off. And Alex, who I think is sporting a new toupee, it looks like he's got a new toupee on. If you look at him from the side, it kind of goes like this. By the way, Elon Musk is wearing a toupee as well. His is better than Alex Jones. Maybe it's because he's a magnate, not a magnet. So he was hassling Marco Rubio. He's trying to get his attention, and Marco Rubio is just unperturbed. He's doing his Marco Rubio thing. There's this phony plant, person just lobbing softball questions, which is what they're there to do. Alex is harassing him. And then Alex touches him on the shoulder. You can't do that. You cannot touch another person. And I know why he did it. Because he wanted to puncture Rubio. And that was a calculated risk on Alex Jones's part. He knew that if he was going to crack through the Rubio wall, that he'd have to touch him and touch him lightly. It's a calculated risk. He took a risk. He knew it. You can see the wheels turning in his head. And that got Rubio's attention. That knocked Rubio off of his center a little bit. He said, "Don't touch me, Alex. Don't touch me." So he got what he wanted out of that moment. That was risk reward. I think, he risks looking like a bully in the realm of public opinion, which is where everybody seems to be judged these days. But at the same time, he managed to sort of knock Rubio a little bit off of his feet and then have to deal with him. And you can see Rubio's bodyguards behind him. They were like, "Oh, shit. Do we have to jump in on this?" But by and large, you just don't do that. You don't touch another person, especially in a heated situation like that. Look what happened to that pastor in the bizarre Aretha Franklin funeral ritual deal. Put his arm around Ariana Grande, and it's a good thing he's a pastor. It's a good thing he's a brother, because if he was white, he wouldn't be working again. I mean, it's like, but I mean, that whole thing with Ariana Grande is ridiculous. I mean, she's wearing like a little frickin' cocktail dress, shaking her gospel booty. I mean, what are they thinking? And there's Bill Clinton behind her. Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. Yeah. Speaking of high strange, there's a new remake coming out of A Star is Born. Originally, the first version was with Judy Garland. The second version was with Barbra Streisand. Anybody know who the third version is going to star? In 3, 2, 1, Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga is going to play the Barbra Streisand character in A Star is Born. Bradley Cooper will be playing the Chris Christopherson role. And guess who's in the movie? Dave Chappelle. David Chappelle is in the movie. He plays Bradley Cooper's manager, I think he's his manager. So much for not dancing with the Illuminati, David. I love Dave Chappelle. A lot of people don't think Dave Chappelle is Dave Chappelle anymore. I don't think so. I think Dave Chappelle is still Dave Chappelle. I don't know what happened to Dave, though. He knows what he's doing now. And Bradley Cooper, do you know Bradley Cooper speaks about 5 or 6 languages? Bradley Cooper, I believe, is a spy. He's a total spy. Star is Born. Lady Gaga, reinventing the brand. Her handlers have plans for her. It's going to be all grown up now. singing with Tony Bennett, doing the dive bar tour, singing the national anthem. A Star is Born. There's a lot of investment in Lady Gaga, isn't there? I bet you Britney Spears said, why didn't they do that with me? Why didn't they do that with me? I could have been a star. Poor Britney. Poor Britney Spears. Hey, let's talk about this EU thing. Before I do that, let me just check in the chat room. Are there people in the chat room? I think Alex looked like a jerk, like a little kid. It was not a great look for Alex. It was not a great look at all. Nope. Yeah, he kind of made Marco Rubio kind of look good, which is kind of hard to do. You know, Alex is he's drowning. I was talking with Emily last night. She thinks the whole thing is a charade. The whole thing is a put on with him getting taken off the air and everything. Maybe. I might be inclined to agree with that, but he's definitely not looking good. And he's certainly not looking good physically. Not at all. Mm-mm. Okay, let me talk about this other piece here that I wanted to get into today. And it has to do with the EU. It's really interesting because we talk about countries like Germany and France, Spain, and they don't exist. Those countries don't exist anymore. The men and the women that are theoretically leading those countries, they're nothing more than figureheads and puppets for the EU. People say, well, the EU is really just a trade group, and well, no, that's not the case at all. The EU is a governing body. The EU is become a superstructure. They may as well just take all the names off those countries now and just call it all EU. I mean, it's one of those things where it's kind of like the nationalist or the statist placebo. Oh, yeah. You can be a country. Sure. You're allowed to keep your name. Oh, but just wait. We're going to start shipping people in. And when we do, the culture that you were holding on to, even though you weren't really a country anymore, but you had your culture, well, that's going too. So we're going to culture side you. You're only going to be a country in name. Everything that you have to do or you have in terms of your sovereignty is dispossessed and has been handed over to a governing body that you have to answer to. And we will levy you with taxes. We will levy you with any kinds of fees, any kinds of tariffs, and anything that we need from you as a country, you were going to give it to us because you voted, your leaders voted to be a part of this union. These countries don't exist anymore. They don't. And their cultures are going by the wayside. And it's all planned. So we have to ask ourselves, well, what's going on here? Why would they do this? Why would they create an element of complete destruction and to some extent even desecration? Why would they do that? Well, if you go back and look at what was happening before 1913, 1913 is a really pivotal year. 1913 is when the United States gets into World War II. Well, I'm sorry, World War I. Prior to that, World War I had already been kicking and was happening. They're about to settle World War I, by the way. They're about to settle it out. Okay, we're done. Let's just draw up the map. No. We've got to bring the United States in. Let's bring them in. Of course, that coincided with the creation of the Federal Reserve, federal income taxes, and the incursion into World War I. It's a game changer. But prior to that, if you go back to the 1900s, what we had in Europe were they weren't even nation states. They were principalities, and they were run by families, royal families. The Habsburgs, the Warburgs, the House of Hanover, the houses in Netherlands. These are the people that the black nobility of Italy, almost all of which are still here and around today, which we'll talk about. So that was a time where they knew, they being the ruling bodies and the aristocrats of Europe, knew that their days as the de facto faces of Europe, as the rulers of the various principalities, their days were coming to an end. And they knew it. They knew it, and in many cases, they were even orchestrating that demise. Look at the French Revolution. The Rothschilds were behind the French Revolution, but do you think they were the only? They were the only entity behind the French Revolution? No. There were a bunch of other ruling families in Europe that wanted their noble competition in France eliminated. They wanted to eliminate the competition, so they created this revolution. They gave this madman Robespierre a ton of power, and they just started lopping the heads off all the filthy rich, because the French were seduced by these grand ideas of liberté, equality, freedom, fraternity, noble ideas. But they were being completely hijacked, absolutely hijacked. Sounded really good. It's like, hey, look what happened over there in the United States of America. We could have it here. You know, Lafayette was imprisoned for most of the French Revolution. Lafayette was an interesting guy. He's a Mason, big time Mason, buddy of Washington. He was urging Washington to free the slaves. So come on, dude. You know, it's like you don't get freedom part way. It's going to be free, be free. So his contribution to that was that he freed the slaves of Guyana. Guyana was under the French Guiana, was indentured, and thanks to Lafayette, that wasn't the case after the American Revolutionary War. So let's go back. They know that their time as being the figureheads of Europe are coming to an end. And they have to. They have to, because they know that things like communication, these people are really smart, been around a long time. And they know that communication is going to be a game changer. And that people are going to use telegraphs, ultimately telephones. They'll come into play very quickly. And they can see the future. They can see that ideas, printing presses, which were kind of large, and there was a lot of labor involved in the printing press, they would become industrialized. They were sitting on the precipice of the Industrial Revolution. And they wanted to control the Industrial Revolution, which they did. And the printing press was akin to today's internet when the Industrial Revolution rolled around. Instead of printing up, say, maybe 100 copies of a book with a manual printing press in a month, you could cook up 5,000 copies of that book in a month. I mean, it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So what they did is they began to move away from this ostensible rule of Western Europe. And there were certain families that were going to be taken out. The Habsburgs clearly were one of them. That's when good old Prince Ferdinand was executed, was killed by what's his name, Princip? Gavre Princip, so bizarre. Of course, for some strange reason, it starts World War One. So what they do is they basically have this massive war. They take Germany out, and they slice and dice Germany, and they redistrict all the countries, and they become countries at that point. They're no longer principalities; they are countries. You see the difference here? And they knew that countries were coming, and that nationalism and statism would be an important part of this evolutionary process. And it was a very temporary process. Because if you look at this changing of the tide from these principalities to countries, it really is just a blink of an eye before we get into the overthrow of Russia, Soviet Union, 1917. Now we have socialism, communism. And that is the new model. And the socialist model is what becomes part of Western Europe after World War II. And a huge part of Central and part of Western Europe, part of Germany, right? Poland, everything basically from one side of Berlin east it's all socialistic. And then communistic. And if you look at what happens with the rest of Europe, it becomes very socialist. So the idea that there's this, these national states in Europe is kind of ludicrous in a lot of ways, because that doesn't happen. Again, they're countries by name, and of course they have cultures, but they're just countries by name because now they're being governed and ruled by, for all intents and purposes, a Politburo and a government that is pretty heavy-handed in terms of taxes and fees and all the stuff that it takes to run a socialist country. Really becomes an impediment in a lot of ways for the development of the individual and the development of individual businesses. Like that's what happened with England. I mean, England was so bad; they were so deeply entrenched in their socialist post-war model that Margaret, that the dole was tremendous. I mean, that was part of a life plan. You would get on the dole. Oh, I'm going to go on the dole for a while. You live in some cheap place, and then maybe if you have any nascent skills as a writer or a rock and roller, you start a band, and you live off the dole. That's what the Clash did. It's a lot of punk rock bands. So yes, there have been nation states, but only by some form of label identification. Yes, they had to have different trade agreements and treaties between each country. I used to be in the music business, and I'd go to meet them in the south of France, and you'd have to negotiate rights for every single country. So if you had a record, you'd have to go to every single booth or every single place and go, okay, we'd like to negotiate rights with you. That's a little laborious. So they still had certain rights, certain trade rights. But if we look at really who is behind those countries, these were not like full-fledged democracies or republics, right? They weren't. Essentially, these ruling families, the Black Nobility, the Black families of Italy, Venice, they were still running the show. They were still running the show behind this socialist curtain. They were still on top. But this was the most fantastic cover for them. Fantastic cover to give this pretext of some form of democracy, certainly heavily on the socialist tip. And because of that, becoming very difficult for people to kind of raise themselves up and become economic challengers to their rule, to their domain. So it was kind of a brilliant. They've controlled everything all along the way. Now they created the EU, which had long. I think they were dreaming the EU what in the early 50s. So they create the EU. Now you just go to, the EU, and if you wanted to do a deal for a record, the rights are there for all these different countries. And yeah, I guess it's great. Still need a passport for these various countries, but they're only countries in name only. So the people that were essentially the ruling class, the elites, the black nobility, they're still running the show, but they keep morphing the nation states of Europe into something different. Principalities, nation states that are masquerading as democracies and really socialist, basically social societies where the individual has greater access to, uh, public facilities and public, general medical, whatever, but does not encourage things like entrepreneurialism. That's a capitalist. That's a capitalist model. So now we have the EU, and yeah, we have France, we have Germany, blah, blah, blah. You notice how England, Great Britain, has not gotten out of the EU, and they probably won't. They're just going to drag their heels and drag their heels and drag their heels. That's what Theresa May was brought in to do. Theresa May was brought in to put cement galoshes on Brexit and just sink it. They'll have some vote and referendum, and they'll figure out a way to just torpedo that thing. And I say, no, the EU will walk with its hands between its legs, tails between its legs, and we're back. So what's happening with the EU now? What are they doing? What are these elites? The black nobility with their high-powered banking families who actually pose a bit of a threat to them. It's an interesting relationship between the black nobility of Europe and these banking families like the Rothschilds and the Warburgs. It was on half the Warburgs and the Goldschmidts, because they became really, really rich. I mean, they helped these rulers get fantastically rich, but at the same time, they became really rich, and now they've been kind of a threat, and they can't get rid of them. And that's one of the reasons why they were all, jazzed about creating Israel. Oh yeah, go over there. Yeah, we'll work with you. Yeah, we'll create that. We'll create that. Help you. We'll help you out with that. England will give you that land, even though it doesn't belong. They'll give it to you. Everybody, just go over there. Go on. We'll have a good time. That's our gift to you. Get the fuck out. That didn't happen, did it? No, it didn't. So what's the EU up to now? Well, let's get into the present. Okay, now that they've basically ripped away any kind of nascent nationalism that might have actually been around, still kind of lingering, somebody who's proud to be a Frenchman, proud of their heritage, proud of their food, proud of all these things that theoretically makes them French. I'll never forget, before the EU happened, I was hanging out in a train station at the edge of France, right on the border of France and Italy. And I was talking with this old French guy, and we were looking at the money. We were looking at French money. And I said, I asked him, how do you feel about the EU coming? He got incredibly sad. This guy he knew, even though he lived through this socialist version of France, post World War II, there was still enough kind of national identity, cultural identity, that he identified with being French. And you just see the look in his face. It was going away. He knew it was going to be different, and it is different. It's drastically different because the EU now can mandate who goes to certain countries and why. And the leaders of these countries in Western Europe, whether it's Merkel or Macron, Salvini, Salvini's trying to rock the boat a little bit. That'll be interesting to keep your eye on that guy. So he's the guy that's running, not running, but he's basically trying to get Italy to become more of a nationalist state. He wants Italy to be more Italy again. Good luck. Spain is kind of trying to go in that direction. You're trying to pull out of this commitment to bring the refugees in. And Spain now is, I think Italy now is sending boats back. They're trying to send people back because on a local level, they're seeing that this is an experiment that has gone horribly wrong. Now, they've done deals with the EU and they have mandates. They have mandates about how many people that they have to take in. They don't have any choice anymore. So this is what's taking place. And you have to say, well, why is that? Why are they doing this? What, and who is doing it? Well, it's still the same people that have been running the script from basically the 1300s on. It's the same people. And all along the way, they keep changing the socioeconomic topography of Europe in order to stay in power. And every time there is the potential for new information, new awareness, new exchange of ideas, it's the clampdown. They did it with the printing press. Right? This is what happened. They did it with the printing press. They knew the printing press was coming. They knew that there'd be a dissemination of ideas. Oh, of course, they would use the printing press to disseminate their ideas. That wouldn't be a problem. That would be a problem. Das Kapital, the Marxist Manifesto, you name it. Mein Kampf, plenty copies to be found. But they did the same thing with the rise of television and radio, which was World War II, clampdown. Here we have the internet. And the internet's pretty new. The internet's been around 20 years, really. I mean, the inception of the internet goes back further than that, but we really started to use the internet in earnest around 1996. 96, 95, right around there, so 23 years old. So now the EU and the people behind the EU, the Black Nobility, are taking this destruction of the cultural. They've already destroyed and blurred the lines of the borders. But there really are no borders anymore with the EU. Although go try and hang out in one of their countries for any given period of time and not have a visa or whatever, and we'll see how well the border thing works for you. But they've already done that. Now they've allowed this very volatile, intense group of mostly men from sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East into Western Europe. And so what they're doing now, they're doing it at such a rate that we're watching over the course of the next 15 to 20 years, because these people think in really long cycles, but just the absolute destruction of any cultural resemblance of what we thought of Europe or what Europe had. The cultural markers, the anchors, they'll be gone. When churches become mosques, and they will be, and I'm not an Islamophobe, I'm just telling you, and it's already happening, the history of those churches will be gone. Statues will be taken. I mean, it'll be it'll be an entirely different Europe. Still very controllable, though. Controllable in the early stages because there's chaos. And controllable afterwards because the people who have always run Europe, and to the large extent the rest of the world, don't give a shit about anybody except them, their bloodline, their offspring, and their divine right to rule this planet. That's just the way it is. There's no altruism involved. And so if they have to have another planned demolition of Europe, they will, because they'll still be on top. Watch the movie Children of Men. Watch Children of Men with Clive Owen. That is the future of Europe. It's the future of Europe. And there's a scene in Children of Men where Clive Owen goes to meet with his uncle to ask him a favor and get papers for a certain operation that he's doing. I'm not talking an operation like, but an operation that involves people, moving people around, stuff like that. And he goes to see his uncle, and you've been indoctrinated in this movie. It's a brilliant movie, by the way. Been indoctrinated in this movie, and it's all dystopian. It's really dystopian. Nobody can have babies anymore. It's dark. People are trying to just, find a purpose to keep going. They're still going to work, but it's very, like, reality is really slippery. And when he goes to go see his uncle, he goes behind this gated sort of world, and it's all still jolly old England behind this gated world that he's been allowed access to. And he hangs out with his uncle who still believes in empire, and he still believes in all these things that made up this fairy tale of what being England was. It's fascinating to watch. And that's kind of where they're headed. That's the model. And they're basically introducing this social pathogen, or social enzyme, a radical social enzyme that essentially eats up the remnants of the last 2,000 years of culture, because they think they can stay on top of it and still run it. Why? Because they've been running things since 1300, maybe before then anyway. So many of you, let's bring this to the present moment in time. Many of you have received in your inboxes new terms and conditions from almost every website that you belong to. Whether it's a website that's just an e-com site, or whether it's a website that is involved with social media. There are new terms and conditions. Where did those terms and conditions come from? They came from the EU. The EU decided, we're just going to slap down a bunch of terms and conditions for the internet, and this is what you're going to have. It's all about privacy and keeping your information. And well, embedded in those terms and conditions, especially with the social media sites like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there are bullet points in there about hate speech. And there are bullet points in there about harassment and bullying. And if you agreed to those T&Cs, in many cases, you could not use a website, or you could not use an app unless you did. You now agreed to those conditions. And they were drafted out of Europe. They were drafted by the EU. And is there any coincidence? Is there any coincidence that Alex Jones and some of the other websites, Jay Dyer, got taken down? That WordPress decided to, get really proactive and start shutting these sites down? No. There's no coincidence, because now they had the legal language in place that allowed them to do that. Well, that was step one. Step two is right in front of us. And I'm going to read you something from boingboing.net. And this is the headline. The author is Cory Doctorow, who I think might be E.L. Doctorow's son. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's the case. Maybe it's his grandson. 6 days until the EU votes on an extinction level event for the internet. Here's what they'll debate. In 6 days, the EU will debate and vote on a pair of copyright regulations that constitute an extinction level event for the internet. Censorship machines. Article 13, foreseeing all user-generated text, video, photos, code, etc., through copyright filters that anyone can add anything to. Anything judged to be a copyrighted work is automatically censored. If they believe that you have a copyrighted work, you will be censored. Think about that. And the definition of copyright is going to be loosey-goosey. Then there is the link tax. Users are banned from linking to news stories unless the site they're linking to has sold a linking tax to the platform that the users are on. Yeah, that's right. There's going to be a link tax. This is so completely, this is perfect. This is total European dominization and colonization. I'm going to talk about that. These proposals were considered and rejected by the EU's experts, by the most esteemed internet experts in the world, and by the UN's special rapporteur on human rights. Nevertheless, they were crammed back into the draft EU copyright directive and very nearly sailed through into EU-wide law, a catastrophe that was only averted by the calls, emails, and texts of 1 million Europeans who contacted their MEPs earlier this summer. You see, all those terms and conditions and all those new pieces of speech and bullying and whatever that you agreed to, it was going to be in that. And they got a bunch of it and they were able to send it out, but they didn't get full and total control. Here we go. On Wednesday, September 12th, the European Parliament will finally hold a proper debate and vote on these proposals. Today, we got our first look at the text of the amendments that they will consider. Many of these amendments are cynical, cosmetic offerings that merely serve to confuse the issues. Of course, it's the devil's language. But several of them offer surprisingly sensible alternatives. Alternatives that do not sell Google, Facebook, Twitter, and other US tech giants a perpetual license to dominate the internet in exchange for a few million tossed at German newspaper families and other European content barons. MEP Julia Reda, responsible for the most of the sensible and uncontroversial clauses in the copyright directive, has produced a useful table laying out the different groups' bargaining positions as we head into the debate. Europeans have a lot on our minds right now. After a climate-racked summer, amidst the rise of reactionary ethno-nationalist groups, the ethno-nationalist groups are only rising because of the fact that you completely changed the flow of immigration to the point where it's been absolutely non-assimilable and has created a huge amount of tension. People are generally fine when they're left alone and they have enough space to live, either amongst themselves or with other people, that they have kind of an equal and relative relationship with a social hierarchy. And that takes time. You can't develop that overnight. But when everything is kind of force-fed, flash-flooded, and all of a sudden people are dealing with people outside of their culture and outside of their culture in a way that is not just extremely dramatic, but in many cases often producing a state of inequality where the new people have an entirely different set of rights, an entirely different set of economic privilege in some ways. It's going to create a high degree of tension. Nationalism just doesn't rise up in the face of a vacuum. No, it rises up because people feel threatened. Thousands of years worth of DNA are kind of going off like alarm clocks inside of them. Gee. Is that surprising? No. I'll continue reading. Europeans have a lot on our minds right now after a climate-racked summer amidst the rise of reactionary ethno-nationalist groups in a society riven by inequality. There's always going to be inequality. There's always going to be inequality. You think this world is going to be equal? The only time it'll be equal is when any kind of economic incentive that can be derived by the 99% is completely obliterated. People are put on some kind of universal income, and the 1% are the gods of the fucking planet. That's the only time inequality will not exist. It's the only time. This place is all about being unequal. It's not about being equality. It's wonderful. It'd be great if we could have it, but it is a fiction. Equality is a fiction. I'm sorry. We can, I mean, it's a nice thing to strive for, I suppose. It's a fiction. The best thing you can do around equality is to treat people fairly. And what does it mean to treat people fairly? You treat people fairly by how they treat you. If people are assholes, do you want to hang around them? You want to treat them fair? If there's a no-go zone in Sweden, you want to go there? It's a really good chance you go there. You're not going to be treated very fairly. There'll be an unequal exchange between people that are angry and pissed off and people that aren't. Well, they created this situation. So equality will be achieved by people who have found their authenticity, their autonomy, their sovereignty, their own individual sense of purpose and will, and align themselves with it in a way that does as little harm to others and actually creates something and makes this place, for whatever reason, a better place. Whatever that looks like. That's how equality ultimately will, or some form, shape, or form of it will occur. In deeply empowered, wise people can have an equal relationship with one another. We can have an equal ground or footing with one another. Okay, you get it. Oh, you get it. You get it. Okay, we get it. That is the foundation of equality. But to think that we're going to have this equal state, it's absurd. If you want to go hardcore metaphysical, of course we're all equal in the eye of the creator, right? That's where the equality piece. If you want to go in that direction, that's where the equality piece does exist. Like in the mind of the Father, we're all equal, right? In the heart and the mind of the Father, we're all equal. We're all his children, theoretically. That's where the equality can exist. Europeans have a lot on their mind right now, blah, 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 blah. Okay. But there is no way we'll solve any of these crises without a free, fair, and open internet. I agree with that. If we let the EU sell the internet to a handful of US tech giants to keep a handful of European entertainment companies happy, we lose the most important tool we have for solving all the problems that really matter. Save Your Internet is the place to go to contact your MEP and let them know how you feel about this. It is really important that you do this today and that you follow it up by enlisting at least 2 friends, by having a conversation with them, and getting their commitment to get in touch with their MEPs too. Well, good luck. Good luck, Europe, on that. One of the things that's showing up now is on YouTube, there are music publishers who claim that they own the rights to Bach and Beethoven. The old days, those were public domain pieces. I mean, once a piece, like for instance now, and they changed the copyright laws, but there were a lot of public domain pieces, because we've been around a long time, that were coming up in the 90s, like stuff from the 20s and the 30s that were set to go into public domain. They changed, the music publishers lobbied Washington to change the public domain laws so that they can hold on to those copyrights. I think if you go back to like the late 1800s, and it's like the quote unquote Negro spirituals that were recorded by Smithsonian folkways, like that stuff is public domain. Like anybody can use that stuff. But we're getting to a point now where even the classical music was considered public domain. But now people like BMG and Sony and EMI, they're claiming that they own Bach. They're claiming they own Beethoven. They're claiming they own Scarlatti, that they own these pieces. So you can't use them anymore, theoretically. I mean, this is where this is going. All right, let me go back to Europe and the EU. So this writer is saying that it's the US tech giants who are trying to get these very wealthy families in Europe to kind of bend to their will. I don't know if that's really the case, Corey. I don't know if that's the case. I think it's more along the lines that the EU wants to control content and it wants to control the flow of information. It wants to control copyright because it has. And the EU is ultimately comprised of the Black nobility, the Black families of Europe who created the EU in order to be the organelle of their society for the next 1,000 years. And it being a model to create all these other unions that ultimately becomes a one world order or new world order based upon all these unions. And the EU is created specifically for that. If you look at what the EU did, or the countries of Europe, at the behest of the kings and the queens, they loaded their big ships up with cannons and they sent those big ships up out into the world. And that's when colonization started to occur. So there's all this empire building during that time. And they were all involved. And sometimes they got along, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they were French ships that ran across English ships. They'd have battles. Sometimes they were pirates that were posing as pirates, but were really working for fill in blank country. They were, pirates that were, they were the terrorists of the open seas. But what they were doing is they were empire building. They were colonizing. And it almost feels like they have decided that they're going to turn their attention onto this new domain and the colonization of a new domain. And that is the internet. Like they already conquered Europe. They conquered Europe a long time ago, and they're reconquering it again right now, making sure that there's absolutely zero indigenous culture that can theoretically survive this wave of immigration. And they're fine because this is the new domain. This is the new domain. This is the new colonization. And it goes right along with creating taxes, just like good old King George was taxing the people in the United States. The link tax is the same thing. But we're dealing now with layers and layers and layers of obfuscation and having to be very, very difficult to kind of get to the heart of who these people are. You're dealing with the internet, you're dealing with subcommittees, you're dealing with groups, institutes, and then from that, and those are all institutional, right? And then you're dealing with people inside of those groups, and then those groups are connected to kind of a larger hierarchy inside the EU. And then, of course, there's these strange little vassal or satellite relationships with the EU based upon what was these, were the countries previously known as. And then behind them, you might get to sort of have a touch point with the people that are really running everything. But in order to get there, you've got to go through all these different layers to work your way back behind, the socio-intellectual force that is creating the hive mind. So it's a new form of colonization. And it's just like I was talking about earlier, where we have this widespread and rampant relationship with pornography that is almost pervasively socialized versus being able to speak freely and truth to power, which is becoming truncated and more compact to the point where it's getting tighter and tighter and tighter, in those spaces where we can actually speak freely, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, well, here we go. We no longer need to develop, these various nation states and adhere to their cultural roots and their, 2,000 years plus of history. We don't need to do that. And in fact, that's kind of an old model. This is the new model. So they're letting go of that, and they're putting more energy and emphasis into this new form of colonization. And it's a big one. We live our lives online most of the time. We're doing banking online. We talk to our relatives online. I'm speaking to you through a computer online. We buy things online. They know this. This is the new country. And this is a country without borders. This is a country without rules, or has been in many ways. It's all going to change. And it's the same people that essentially colonized the world and created empire that we're in the process of seeing them do the exact same thing right now. And the consequences for this are much more startling. They're much more startling than that first wave of colonization. Much more startling. Because we've become so connected to the internet that if we cannot do business through the internet, we're screwed. I just did a really great talk with Regina Meredith. And we actually talked about this. That should air, I think, sometime next week. And we talk about where everything is headed in terms of the money. Of course, the EU is going to drive that as well. I was talking with her yesterday. It was 2 days ago, and she was telling me that there is a place where she goes to get coffee in California. You can't even use cash there anymore. They won't accept cash. That's where it's headed. This is where it's headed. So their domain will be, and their colonization will be greater and far more reaching than anything we've ever seen before. There used to be a time where you could sort of step out and go somewhere else, and you maybe go to a country that was not that inhabited, or maybe it was just so far out of reach that the colonizers didn't have a whole lot of interest in it. Samoa. That's not the case anymore. Inner space will be completely locked up, buttoned up, colonized, and the new empire will be in existence. In fact, it almost already is. So I wanted to bring this to your attention and just kind of, put it out there, let you know what's happening, because it's happening. It's happening right now. And it has pretty intense consequences, especially the copyright stuff. A lot of people who love to do memes have been talking about, well, if I use this picture and I put out a meme, which is a pretty effective tool in a lot of ways. It's agitprop. If that's the case, you may not be able to get all memey. Just saying. I want to talk a little bit about AI today. And interesting enough, Elon Musk. There's something came through here while I was riffing. Give me a second. Let me find this thing. So I just got this. Just came off the internets. I can find it here. So Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan. He was talking a lot of shit. A lot of shit. And he was talking about, let's see if I can find this thing. He was talking about AI. And I totally agree with him about AI, by the way. AI is really the 400-pound gorilla in the room. Holy smokes. And I've been talking about AI for a very, very long time. Like I was preaching against AI back in, 2008, 2009, when I started my blog. I could just see where it was all headed. And it's going to be very intense. Let me find this thing about Tesla. This thing just came through here. Let me find this. Okay, so here's what happened. Elon Musk got high on Joe Rogan. This is from CNBC. Elon Musk may have violated Tesla's business conduct policy by smoking weed. Elon Musk smoked weed on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, which may be in violation of Tesla's Code of Business Conduct and Ethics. Tesla board members have raised concern over Musk's recreational drug use. Elon Musk's public marijuana consumption could be a hit to his professional career. The Tesla CEO appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast on Thursday night, where he discussed a wide range of topics, including his tweeting behavior, his boring company's flamethrowers, and Neuralink devices that could connect brains to computers. He also sipped whiskey and definitely inhaled a mixed tobacco and marijuana cigarette. The weed could be the smoking gun, showing Musk violated his company's policies. This is from the business code, the Code of Business Conduct and Ethics. Tesla also asks that you do your part by following safety and health rules and practices and reporting, either openly or confidentially, accidents of any unsafe equipment behavior, such as use of illegal drugs or conditions to your manager, supervisor, human resources, or the legal development or the legal departments. Violence and threatening behavior are not permitted, and under no circumstances should you bring a weapon to work. Employees should report to work without being under the influence of illegal drugs or alcohol. The use of illegal drugs in the workplace will not be tolerated. Here's where it gets a little tricky. Some states like California, where Rogan's podcast is recorded, have legalized the plant for recreational use. However, marijuana is still illegal according to U.S. federal law. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions rolled back President Barack Obama era policies in January. But the only thing that guy has done, by the way, that previously dictated the Justice Department would not pursue cases against those who violated federal marijuana laws in states where pot had been legalized. One could argue Musk was representing Tesla as its CEO during the interview by imbibing alcohol and marijuana. He was under the influence while at work. In an email to The Guardian, Musk said, "Our policy allows trace amounts of THC, an ingredient of cannabis, during work times, provided they are below the safety limits, much like a minimum alcohol level." This isn't the first time there's been concern about Musk's drug use. Tesla board members have also raised concern over Musk's consumption of recreational and prescription drugs. According to the New York Times, in particular sources told the publication that Musk's use of sleeping aid Ambien may be having negative effect, causing him to ramble on Twitter. Let's see. Stock price is down. Wow. Stock price is down, let's see, by $18. Almost $19. If you are on the board of Tesla, you're not digging that. So this is from ABC. Tesla board needs come to Jesus meeting with Elon Musk amid company turmoil. Tesla shares were volatile Friday morning amid chaotic views Hold on a second. Find this. Among chaotic news for the embattled electric car maker, leading one expert to say the company board needs to have a come to Jesus with Elon Musk. Shares tumbled upon news of two senior executives leaving a company hours after founder and CEO Musk smoked marijuana and drank whiskey on a podcast interview. Midday Tesla shares were trading at 6.4% lower at $262.90, having dropped 10%. It's about a $16 share, $16 per share. It's time for the board of directors to have a come to Jesus meeting with Elon Musk, said William Klepper, a corporate governance expert who is a professor at Columbia Business School and author of The CEO's Boss, Tough Love in the Boardroom. The board can't sit back and watch this destruction of value because of the uncertainty of behavior the CEO is presenting to the public. Well, it depends. I'm sure Joe Rogan's public loved it. Yeah. Spur it up, Elon. Yeah, brother. Let's go buy us a Tesla. I think the here's what you do right now, right? If you are a millennial with like money in your pocket, go out and buy a Tesla and put a Nike swoosh on it. Wouldn't that just be the ultimate symbol of support? You could raise both fists at the same time. Yeah, weed baby, Kaepernick baby, yeah, power to the puffers, yeah. What a world, huh? What a world. Are they going to, is Musk that much of a genius that they can actually fire him, let him go? Good luck. Is there a new Elon Musk out there that they're ready to prop up? Is he that much of a genius? I'd say the answer is probably no. He's a funny guy, though. I think he's funny. I knew this guy named Phil. This guy Phil is every bit of Elon Musk's equal. I'm telling you, this guy Phil. I used to hang out with Phil back in the 90s. One of the greatest dudes you'll ever meet on the face of the planet. He's got the heart of a lion, this guy. And Phil had 21st century maglev technology that he had developed. He had the plans. He had everything. This was the most brilliant design. He had people who were professors at the University of Washington basically rubber stamping his designs and saying he's way ahead of everybody else. And it wasn't just the maglev technology, but it was how it was going to move along. He figured out a way to actually put individual cars on the maglev technology. So you could sit in your car and you wouldn't even have to be on the train. You sit in your car and get shot down this maglev technology at about 105 miles an hour. Just hang out in your car. You get to wherever you needed to go, and boom, there'd be a car thing, elevator, drop you off, and you'd be where you needed to be. And the trestles and all of his tracks were made out of bamboo because bamboo could withstand the shocks of an earthquake. I mean, he had this thing thought out. I saw this guy's freaking brilliant. And that wasn't his only idea. I mean, this guy was an idea machine. He's such a great guy. I would say, I would go on record, Phil's not a coder, but he's an engineer. From an engineering perspective, he was every bit of Elon Musk's equal. The difference between Phil and Elon Musk is that Elon Musk was propped up. You know, it's like, okay, you're the golden boy. Whoever he is, whatever he is, you're it. Phil didn't have that. Phil had great ideas. He had amazing ideas that people would either abscond or take or use them for a while. And look, modern history is filled with thousands of versions of Phil with whatever idea that they've had. And most of them don't come to light for any number of reasons. But somehow we get Elon Musk and we don't get the Phils of the world. All right. Let's check in with the chat rooms and see what's happening here. We got Finca, Lynn. Let's go into the Spreaker chat. Thanks, Robert. The excellent history lesson. I'm glad to see. Okay, Diane. Thanks for hanging out. So listen, if you're on Spreaker, the best way to find me, and I'm going to put the links up on my Facebook page, is to come on over to the Robert Phoenix YouTube page. It is not the free. It is not the 11th house page. Okay, it's not the 11th house page. Put the link. Just look up Robert Phoenix. You can come hang out here. We're doing this every day now. I'm not always going to rock the A's cap though. The A's bucket. Mm-mm. But I'm wearing it because they're in the playoffs, or they will be. They will. They beat the Yankees. Sorry, Steve. Steve Kremiza. When you did Musk's chart, you said he shouldn't. Absolutely. I totally said he shouldn't do drugs. I saw it in his chart. I'm telling you, man, these people, if they were smart, they'd hire me. If they were smart, somebody was really smart. Like, they would hire, like a CEO company, they'd hire me. I can help with a lot of stuff. You know what else would be, and I've thought about this for a very long time. I think general managers in sports need to embrace astrology. They need to embrace astrology. You can see where player cycles are up or where player cycle is down. You can see all this stuff. You can see where relocation, they'd be good for your team. They'd be difficult for your team. Let's say a player gets traded to California and all of a sudden he's got Neptune on his ascendant. I would tell that team, don't trade for this guy. Don't sign him. He's going to have an issue. He's going to lose himself. Conversely, if his sun line runs through Dallas, Texas, I'm like, don't sleep on this. Make it happen. That'd be the new metrics for sports. Okay, I'm going to get on out of here. I'll be back on Sunday nights with the aforementioned live stream. If you go over to my other YouTube page, you'll be able to find the latest and greatest with Heather Eland and myself. And then I think check out the interview with me and Emily. There's a lot out there. I'm everywhere now. I'm ubiquitous. I'm like Walt Whitman. Find me at robertphoenix.com if you're interested in an astrological reading. Find me over on Facebook and find me in Flyover. I'm out of here. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay on what's possible. I'll see everybody on Sunday night, and enjoy this Virgo new moon. Reset your intentions and align yourself with purity to the best of your ability. Ciao.